So, in the last two videos, we have successfully implemented the domain layer and the data layer for the user feature. And we have discussed that the most independent layer, which is the domain layer in this clean architecture, decides what, which means that what kind of actions would be performed on what kind of data, representing the core of the system. Also, we have discussed that the data layer decides where and how, which simply means that how actions will actually execute and from where the data will be sourced or stored. And this video will walk you through what the presentation layer decides and focus upon. So the presentation layer decides how the upcoming data is presented on the screen. The how in case of presentation layer is totally different from the data layer, because how in case of data layer decides how actual logic is done, but in case of presentation layer it's related to the user interface, like how the upcoming data from a specific database is presented on the screen. For example, when user creates an account, the presentation layer ensures that the action is visually represented and appropriately communicated back to the system. So before going forward, let me tell you one more thing, that for the first time of this user feature, I would have to create 3 videos on presentation layer, because here we will deal with the state management solution, dependency injection, and lastly to bind the actual logic with the UI to make it functional, which is kind of challenging part. That is why we will divide the presentation layer into 3 videos only this time, and for the subsequent features we will directly implement things, because that would become more easy for you once you got familiar with the structure. So in this video we will only focus on the state management, for example the block or cubit of the presentation layer. So now let's go and implement the cubits for the user feature. So inside the user feature that here we have implemented data layer, also the domain layer. It's time to go for the presentation layer. So the presentation layer, we have already created the pages in here, and now in this video we have to deal with this block. So inside this block directory we will change its name first of all to cubit, and then inside this cubit we will create a new directory. We will name it user, and one more directory, name it get single user, and also create one more directory, name it auth, and go for one more directory, credential, and lastly the get device number, to keep everything separated, so that inside the cubit our business logic will be separated from the UI, and inside the UI we will simply call the methods from the cubit to perform a specific task, and these cubits will depend upon the use cases, which clearly shows the dependency of presentation layer on the domain layer. So first of all, let's go for creating the auth cubit. So go for new and go for the cubit class. So if you don't have this cubit class, you have to install the block plugin in your Android Studio, or also if you're using VS Code, so there you also have to download an extension for the block. So if you don't know about this extension, simply you have to go to the settings of the Android Studio and go for plugins in the marketplace, search for block, and download this first block that I have installed, so that when you next time start creating a directory you will get this block class and the cubit class. So this time go for the cubit class and select the equatable for the value equality. You might be familiar with the value equality, as I have explained it in the week 2 while dealing with block and cubit in an simple application, and also in the Firebase CRUD. So if you don't know about this and you really want to understand this, watch either this video where I am explaining the value equality in case of Firebase CRUD, or also you can watch this detailed video from where you will get to know about how actually the value equality is in Dart programming language. So anyways, let's go forward for creating the cubit for the auth. So we will simply name it auth and go for OK. So as we have checked the equatable, so in the state class we will directly get our state extended with the equatable, so that we don't have to care about the value equality, like when comparing old stats with the new stats. If it has same value, so it will not again rebuild the state in that case, but only if the values are changed in the stat, so only in that case the stat will be rebuilt of the UI. So we got the equatable directly in here. So in case of auth, we are going to have two kinds of stats. First, the authenticated and the unauthenticated. So we got these two stats for the auth stat, which extends the auth stat, an abstract class, and this authenticate stats accepts one parameter, the UID, and we're passing it in the constructor and also in the list of props for the value equality. And this is the unauthenticated stats. So these will be emitted accordingly when the user is authenticated or unauthenticated. So now let's go for auth qubit and start implementing this. So as I said, the qubits will depend upon the use cases. So for the auth use cases, the auth qubit will depend upon only these three specific use cases of get current UID use case and is sign in use case and also sign out use case to deal with these operations. Now let's go for importing these use cases. Also make sure to pass them in the constructor. Also make it required. So we'll go for this current UID, required this is sign in use case, required this sign out use case. Now it's time to create the future methods for them and then we will go for implementing them. So we got these three methods of return type future void, so that whenever we call them we can also do .then to decide what will happen next when the specific task of future is completed. And this app started method will call when the app is started to decide if the user is authenticated or not. So this will directly be called whenever our app starts, and this logged in and this logged out will be called according to specific conditions. You will see it later when you go for binding these methods to the UI to make our UI functional. So as this is just a video of implementing the state management solution, so for now let's only keep your focus on these methods, that how these will be implemented, and I will also explain along the way how these will work with the UI, so you don't have to worry about this. So for the app feature, for the app started, first of all here I will put the try catch block, and if some error occurs I will directly emit the unauthenticated state. And inside the try block, first of all I will call the isSign-in method to check if the user is signed in or not, if the UID is equal to null or is not equal to null. Then we will check two conditions. If the ID was not equal to null, so simply we will call the get current UID use case and will pass it in the authenticated state, so that we got the current user UID, meaning that the user is authenticated. Or otherwise, if the UID was equal to null, so simply we will emit the unauthenticated state, meaning that the user is not authenticated, so that we have to send the user to the sign in page or whatever the page is for the authentication if the user is not authenticated. So in case of authenticated, we will send the UID to our home page to have our current user in there and deal with this. And if there is no ID, if the user is not authenticated, so simply we will emit the unauthenticated state and the user will remain on the sign-in page. So that's it for the app started feature method. Now what will happen when the logged in method is called? This would be pretty simple method of try catch. If some error occurs, so simply emit the unauthenticated state, otherwise call to the get current UID use case and then emit the authenticated state by passing that UID. And we are calling the call from here, which is the call method inside the use case. And I told you the call method is the method to make the class instance callable, so that the get current UID is the instance of the get current UID use case class. So if I remove the call from here, so you can see the get current UID use case is an instance, but we can directly call it like this by putting the parentheses in here. So that is what it means by callable classes in case of Dart programming language. By making the call method in here, we can make the instance of a class. If we take the instance of class, we can make it callable like this one. This will still works in here. As you can see, this is not making any error in here, and also this is also a good way to call this, and also this one is also the good way. You can see if I remove the brackets from here, it got the error that now we don't recognize if the call method is called and we have got the UID, so that if we put the parentheses in here, so this is also acceptable, and also this call is also acceptable. So this is what it means by the callable classes in Dart programming language. So this was the work of the logged in method. Simply directly pass the UID to the authenticated state, and there we go. The user will become authenticated and the state will be changed from the sign in page to the home page. So this will be decided accordingly. If the state was unauthenticated, so we will keep the user in the sign in page. Otherwise, if the state was authenticated, so we will send the user to the home page to deal with the other functionality of the app, like to send messages to his friends and also do whatever the user want in the application and whatever is the functionality of the application. So in the logout method, this would be pretty simple, doing the same thing, only calling the sign out use case to sign out the user from the application and emit the unauthenticated state to send the user back to the sign in page. That's it. So our auth qubit with these use cases is successfully implemented. Now it's time to go for the credential. So in the credential, we will create a qubit class, again make it equatable, and we'll name it credential. And this credential is going to have the stats of loading, success, credential phone SMS code received, credential phone auth profile info, and also lastly the failure. So whenever it's loading, the credential loading state will be emitted, and credential success, also credential phone auth SMS code received, and also credential phone auth profile info. So these states will be emitted accordingly. Now let's go for the credential qubit, and this qubit is going to depend upon these three credential use cases of sign in with phone number use case, verify phone number, and also create the user in Cloudflare store database. Now let's go for importing them, and then we will pass them in the constructor, and then to deal with their future methods and perform whatever the functionality of that specific use case is. So we'll go for required this sign in with phone number, also required this verify this phone number, and also required this create user use case. And then these three future methods, first submit verify phone number, which requires the phone number. So we will take that phone number when the user enter in the field, that field we have created while we are creating the UI of our WhatsApp clone, and then submit the SMS code, that the code fields that we have created 6-digit code. So when the user receives that code, so the user have to enter that code for going for the next steps. And lastly, to submit the user profile info, which is going to call the create user use case. So whenever user submit its profile info, so the user profile will also be created in the Cloudflare store database. And after verifying the phone number and also the SMS code, all of that verification, so its UID or that user will also be created in the authentication tab of the Firebase with the phone authentication sign-in provider of Firebase. So now let's go for implementing the submit verify phone number. So this method would be really simple try catch block, which is dealing with the socket exception if some internet issue is there. So we will emit the credential failure, and also if some other failure occurs while dealing with the verify phone number, we will still call the credential failure, that the credential fails. Next, the verify phone number will be called if none of the failure occurred, and we'll pass that phone number in here, and we'll simply emit the credential phone auth SMS code received, so that we will directly be navigated to the OTP page here. And then in the credential qubit, we will call the submit SMS code when we have received one. So that submit SMS code will also be very simple method, simple try catch block, also handling the socket exception, and call to the sign in with phone number use case, and call and pass the SMS code inside and emit the credential phone auth profile info, so that we will be navigate to the submit profile info. And lastly, here inside this submit profile info, we will do the same thing again, try catch block, and then in the try block we will call the create user use case and we'll call and we'll pass the user information in here, so that the user will be also created in the cloud file store database, and we will emit the credential success to navigate to the home page, and our authentication will be completed in here. Next, the remaining qubits are get device number, get sign in with user, get single user, and also the user. So let's go for get device number. That would be a really simple method inside the qubit. So this would be a get method, so that we have to create a separate qubit for that. So here we will name it get device number, and while passing the name in here, you have to follow the camel case, the one I am following in here. So you don't have to follow the snake case, like putting the underscores like this, and also don't follow the Pascal case of like we're defining the classes. So the first letter will also be capitalized, but follow the camel case like this, start from the first letter small, and the other words when it come, its first letter will be capitalized, and also for this one like this. Now go for OK, and the get device number will be created like this, and then go for its stats. So this is going to have the stats like get device number loading, get device number loaded. When it's loaded, this will give us the list of context entity, and we will pass it in the get device number loaded, and also for the value equality, pass it in the list of props, a getter method coming from the equatable package, as we have extended the get device number stat with equatable, and also the other classes are extended with the get device number stat, an abstract class, so that we got the get props override in all of the methods for the value equality, so that this stat will be loaded whenever the contexts from our phone are loaded, and if some failure occurred, this failure will be emitted on the UI that some failure occurred while loading the context from the phone. And then this method or qubit will directly depend upon the get device number, or let's copy its name from here, use case, and paste it in here, get device number use case, go for importing it, pass it in the constructor, and this will be this dot get device number will be here a future void method, and this is not going to be semicolon but a comma in here, or also you don't have to pass the comma as we have only the one use case in here, so that we can make it also like this. And then go for future get device number, and will be asynchronous, and in the body it will do the same try and catch, and call the get device number like this, and emit the get device number load stat and pass the contact numbers to this, so that whenever this load stat is emitted, so we will get the context number inside the context that we got in that stat, and then we will load them in the UI. And next go for get single user. This will also be containing only single method. That is because here we are only dealing with the single get method, so for that we need the stats of loading, loaded, or failure. So that's because we're creating these separate classes for this. So the get method needs the loading, loaded, or failure stats to emit. So for that we create the separate qubit class if it's required. So for the get single user, we will create the separate qubit, as this also requires the loading, loaded, or failure stat. So we will name it get single user, and for the single user we will have stats of loading, loaded, and failure. Inside the loaded, we will simply load the single user of user entity, pass it in the constructor, and also for the value equality, pass it in the get props. And this is only single user, as we are using the only UID to load that single user. So that initially we will call the get single user method and will pass that UID that we got in the authenticated stat, and using that UID we will load our current user and will retrieve its information and will display it anywhere we want of that current user. So that for the get single user we got a separate method, and then here this is going to directly depend upon the final, let's say, get single user, copy its name, paste it in here, get single user, and pass it in the constructor required this, and then also import this. We are going to have the future void get single user, and then it's going to require the string uid, make it required, and then it's in the body of this. First of all, make it asynchronous, as it's going to be a future void method. So in the body of this get single user, first we'll emit the loading stat, and then we will call the get single user and we'll pass that uid. So as this is going to return the stream list of user entity, so we will listen to the stream and this will give us the users, and I will emit the stat of get single user loaded, and the single user I will call the user dot first to get that single user on that specific uid. So that's it for the get single user. And lastly, here we have to implement or create the user class of equatable, and we'll name it user, and then open its body, and its stats are going to be the same: loading, loaded, and failure. In the loaded stat, it will load the list of user entity, so that we got all the users from the cloud file store database, and we will display it in the my chat page, or also in here we will first try to load the context from the phone. So let's go to the user cubit, and here this is going to depend upon the update user use case and also get all user use case. So now let's go for importing them, and then to pass them in the constructor this dot update, and also required this dot get all users use case. So let me remind you, if you are not familiar with the block and cubit and this sound abstract to you like what we are doing in here, so I already have created the videos on that in the week 2, so that is why I'm not repeating it again, and I'm just assuming you already know that. This is because I already have created the videos on that in very detail in the week 2, so that if you don't know about them, you simply can watch them by going to the week 2, and the ending videos of the week 2 are related to the block and cubit, where I explain all of that stuff, how the value equality works in the block and cubit, and how you can create a first simple and then Firebase grid application using block and cubit both. And also there we have created a complete notes app. After that, I also gave you a task to convert that notes app and use the block or cubit in here. So that was a task for you in the week 2 after learning the block and cubit deeply in the week 2. So again, if you don't know about them, you simply can go back and watch them. Now anyways, let's go forward and start creating the user cubit methods. So that would be really simple methods: get all user, first emit the user loading, and call to the stream, as its return type is stream list of users. You can see in the repository for the get all user and get single user, I have return type of stream list of user entity, so that we have to listen to the stream. This will give us the users, and we will emit the load stat and will pass the users inside, so that we will listen to the stream of users and will directly load them in my chats page, so that if some changes happens in the user names, profiles, or whatever inside their details of users, so this will be directly reflected on the UI, so that we don't have to rebuild the UI to see the changes in here, as these are the streams. And also the update methods is really straightforward. Simply try and catch block and call to the update user use case and pass that user inside, and we are done with that. And also if we remove this call from here, so this instance of the update user method will also work like this. So also it's better to pass the call in here to make it clear that we have called the call method. So that was it for the update, not the update but the auth cubit, credential cubit, get device number, get single user, lastly the user. And you may also notice one more thing: the cubits are directly depending upon the use cases. So what about their dependency? So that is where the dependency injection comes in. We will explore in the next video, so that whenever we call to the auth qubit, so that we don't have to pass the get current UID use case, is sign in use case, is sign out use case again and again, but only once that would be passed, and then we will use that qubit for providing and calling the methods from it. So In the next video, we will go for the dependency injection, and in the third video of the presentation layer, we will go for binding these methods to the UI to make the user feature functional in the UI. And then for the other features, I am not going to create these separate videos on the presentation layer, but you might already be familiar with these, so that we will directly implement the cubit and the dependency injection to inject the dependencies and then simply provide them and then utilize them in the UI to make the UI functional, and we will go with this behavior for the other features. So that was it. For this video, we have implemented successfully the cubits, and the next video we will go for dependency injection. So if you have any questions, please ask me in the comment section if you didn't understand something in this video. So I will explain it in detail also in here if you ask. So that's it again, and see you in the next one.